So, what do you do when corruption strikes? And again, this is I wish we had a product that just threw up a master alarm on our desk when we ran into corruption.
Yeah, it would have to flash red really, and then it would also have to have really loud sound that was really like annoying if we had a device like that. But really, the tool is CheckDB, and that's our master alarm when something goes wrong. Now, the first thing that will happen when when you're hit with corruption, if you haven't experienced this before or practiced it, is you'll go to Google or Bing or your favorite search engine, and you'll say CheckDB errors, and you'll search on the error code or the specific message, and you'll find somebody who sounds brilliant, who tells you just run CheckDB with repair allowed data loss, and your data will be repaired. Those people should be, I don't know, lined up and thrown out of the database community, because what repair allow data loss, this is an option on CheckDB, and what it says is to go through and scan the database just like CheckDB normally does. But if you find a page, and a page is an 8K chunk of the database, which may contain a few rows to a few dozen rows, and when it finds a page that's corrupt, even if one byte or one row in that entire page is corrupt, it just SQL Server says, let's just throw that away. And it's sort of like if you had a book and you had a couple bent pages and you were scanning through it and you said, oh, this page looks bad, let's just throw it away, and you throw away the whole thing. If you value your data, there is really no good outcome from running repair allow data loss.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is we frequently see it not even work. Like it threw out a bunch of data, and it's still not repaired.
Yep. Exactly. And not only at that point is you're in a mess, but you've lost some data, and it may be even harder to repair things. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Fight Club, and you remember there's 3 rules in Fight Club, and if you remember those, rule number 1 is do not use repair allow data loss. And rule number 2 is do not use repair allow data loss. And rule number 3 is certainly do not use repair allow data loss. Now, after I've said that, there are some scenarios where you could use it, but never use it on a production environment. And it's okay to use it on a copy of a database, not your production system. If you're going to use it with check table rather than CheckDB. And part of the problem with CheckDB is you might run CheckDB and get a couple dozen errors or something, and then you run repair allow data loss and it throws out those couple dozen pages, but then it just keeps going to find more corrupt stuff after it gets past those, and you might lose huge chunks of your database. Yeah, so if you do have to use it with check table once you've rescued any of the data from that table. And if you're going to do it with check table, usually I'm going to assume that everything's going to be thrown away. So I'm going to figure out how do we back up all the data out of that table, and instead of running check table with repair allow data loss, I'm just going to use truncate table, and then have a way to bring all the data back in after we do that.
All right. So if you get corruption, you realized you ran into corruption through one of the ways that we showed you. The very first thing you should do, even if you suspect corruption, is do not restart that SQL server. Don't restart the service. Don't reboot the machine. And I know that's the first thing that you want to do. It's still the first thing that I want to do, and it's just one of the things you have to stop yourself. Take your hand off the mouse. Don't reboot.
Yep.
And as Steve says, the very best case is if you actually have corruption, you're going to be in the same spot that you are now. The worst case is, what if that machine doesn't even boot because there was also something corrupt in Windows? Or what if it does boot, but the SQL server can't start up, or that database can't even connect at all?
Yep. So then once you've got past that urge to try and restart your server, the next thing you're really going to want to do is go and figure out what's going on with your backups and determine, are your backups failing, or are you able to take a backup of that corrupt database? And then try and track down when was the last pre-corruption backup. And if you've got good CheckDB jobs, you should be able to see when CheckDB started failing and then go look at the last good backup before that. I know so often I see people have like 3 to 5 days of backup retention, and that's it. And if the corruption was introduced and it took you a little while to figure out it was there, like you're only running CheckDB once a week and you've only got 3 days worth of backups, well, your options to do the repair are pretty limited at that point. So with those backups, you want to consider how important the data is and how recent the corruption was. And is it easier just to go and grab a pre-corruption backup and restore that and use it? I remember at Past Summit one time, I was talking to a guy and he had hundreds of SQL servers that he managed. And he said to me, why would you ever want to repair a corrupt database. We have good alerting. We know when corruption's hit. We have good backups. We know that we can restore right up to when the corruption was hit. We would never repair a database, he said. He said, we just restore from backup and get it done quickly so that nobody even noticed there was much of an impact there. Now, if that was a bank and that was my bank account database that had my checking account and I just deposited a check and then they went and restored a backup before the corruption, I might lose that deposit. That might not be so good, but some businesses cases will allow you to do that depending on the nature of the data.
So that's talked with your management team. And part of it is even if you know the business needs, they need to know what's possible with the budget that they've supplied you. And we've seen sometimes those discussions, the outcome of that discussion is, okay, we'll have to live with that risk. Or the outcome of that discussion is, here's some more money to close that loophole. The next thing is this is a good question, is can you replay the transaction logs to get past the corruption? And do you have room to go try that, do a restore?
Oh yeah, that's a typo. That should say replay, not reply.
Yep.
Yep. So Derrick, you've got corruption. Your manager is coming down and saying, Derrick, when is it going to be done? What's wrong with it? What are we missing? When is it going to be back? When are the customers going to be able to use the system? When are the employees going to be able to use the system? And when are you going to have it back online? And maybe you'll have a bullhorn like this guy in the picture does. And they're going to keep asking you that, and you can't even get a word out. When is it going to be done? And that can be really painful.
Yeah. So don't let stress drive your decision-making process. And I've certainly been there. It wasn't corruption, but I've dealt with system outages. There was times where I had to literally put my phone on D&D, turn off my cell phone, close Outlook, and just focus on the problem. Now, obviously, keeping management aware is a high priority. Steve and I do that when we do repairs. We tell people, here's the update now, expect an update in an hour or expect an update in 30 minutes. And we hold to that. A lot of the times, even if they go to sleep at night, we will keep sending updates throughout the night to keep them aware, to try to starve off the blowhorn there. But don't let stress drive you into the corner and then you made a bad decision. A bad decision could be lost data. Potentially you put people back in a system that isn't stable. And now all of a sudden people are writing more to that database that's already corrupt.
Yep, absolutely. So another important factor is, can I get a do-over? And if you've ever played a video game and you get partway into it and you screw something up, you realize, oh, I'll just try that again and I'll get it right next time. Well, in life, it's not always that way. But if there's a way that you can figure out how to get a do-over when you're doing corruption repair, specifically if that's a backup of the corrupt database, or to make sure that if you go through the process and you get to some point where you realize, oh, I wish I'd saved that in the beginning of the process, you get to some point that you can roll everything back. I don't want to use the term, not roll back like a SQL rollback, but that you can go back to that starting point and start over again with a do-over and do it right. Because most of the time when you're recovering data, you don't know what's all broken until you get all the way through it. And having a way to do it over, and if that means you've taken a backup of the corrupt database and put it on a test server, that is an awesome way to handle it, because then you know that what you're doing certainly isn't going to make it worse, and you can certainly do a restore and start it over again if you need to.
Yeah, and I think the other part there about putting it on another server is, if you don't know what caused the corruption, if you're actually getting it on fully different hardware and storage, you could be protecting yourself there against further corruption.
So before fixing or removing corruption, there's some things you're going to want to consider. The first one we just talked about is the do-over. Do you have a way to start over if something goes wrong? And that's probably the most important thing while you're doing the recovery, to make sure. And that way, it's sort of the do no harm. No matter what you do, if you can undo it and start over again, you're making it no worse than when you started.
And do you have, again, a backup of the current state? Can you make a backup to get you back there?
And if your solution is going to cause data loss of any kind, can you save anything before causing that data loss? And a great example is, if you know that there's a page that's corrupt and it has 12 rows in it, can you go and figure out how to pull those 12 rows back from a backup or from a copy or some other part of the system to fill them in after they've been lost?
And then do you have somebody to review your ideas with? And I can't cover how important this is, They don't even need to be a technical person, but just somebody to allow you to whiteboard out your idea, or talk through the idea of what you're going to do and what order you're going to do them, because that can help you make sure that you're making good decisions.
And that doesn't even have to be a person, because really the key thing here is that you're explaining it. And I knew a guy years ago that I worked with. When he ran into a problem and there was nobody to explain it to, he would explain it to his dog. And even though the dog couldn't reply and couldn't tell him there was anything wrong, it was the act of verbalizing it and explaining it that made him realize that he was saying something wrong. Even if it's a dog or a non-technical spouse or your kids or a baby that can't talk yet, it might be better to explain your ideas before proceeding. You're in much better place if the person you're talking to is technical and understands what you're saying. But even if they're not, go for it. You can call us for help if you need help there.